fair play kind of philosophical thinking. And in that, he really asserts that part of the issue that is always present in his political argument around who deserves a living wage and who deserves to have access to resources has to do with these two camps of thinking. So fair play essentially is just kind of what's been talked about, which is that that everybody essentially, right, and this is without regard to any of the kind of things that we just talked about, which we know are real, has an opportunity to create the life they want for themselves in America. Yeah. Essentially, right? So that they have access to schools, they have access to housing, they have access to resources and some of the natural resources that exist, and as such, right, should be able to kind of move themselves into places that will allow them to make sustainable living, right? We won't discuss all of the things that we know that really kind of prevent and kind of can really pervade systems that prevent that from happening for many folks that we just talked about, including our own lives, right? And then there's this other, that's buttressed up against this whole discussion about fair share, right? And so this concept of what does it mean in a country that has the riches that it has, right? To ensure that everyone has a way to be able to support themselves and their children and their families in a way that is sustainable and that is not a living of subsistence, essentially. And so we've heard all that, but what happens with that argument is that it really gets deeply ingrained, right, in political arguments, and it becomes really deeply ingrained in how messaging, like I really appreciate the Keron's message around, if you have an hour, if you have this, here's how this will impact this 5,000 will, this will raise a family from 16 to 20, whatever, that's very logical and very clear and very succinct, right? But what happens for most of us is that this other stuff gets charged with people are lazy, right? People are not accessing resources that they really do have if they're ready. People don't want to do it in the way that all of us have done it historically. And we know, we look at history, right? So what was doable for my grandmother, right? And her, what was available to her, right? So we talk about endowments and other things that people might be left in the family. So there are a number of things that just simply weren't available to many communities and many folks in this country. And so the capacity to build on that legacy of resources or whatever just simply didn't exist, right? And so there's always this sense of kind of starting from a new place, essentially, when new ages and when new generations kind of emerge to the world to take care of themselves. They don't come with a dowry, they don't come with endowments, they don't come with, there are a number of things that really help to launch people to buy their homes and to buy things. So all that being said, so there's this red herring argument that then becomes really embedded oftentimes, unfortunately, and really in some liberal, quite frankly, middle class privileged thinking even, right? So it's not just the downstate and collar counties and surrounding communities that then say, it's just in these areas where these people really don't have the capacity, they don't have global thinking. It really are sometimes people sitting right next to you. Yes. Quite frankly, right?
Yeah, I agree.
That then have some internal feelings, whether they speak out publicly or not, about their about what should be done and who has the right to resources and what those resources actually need to look like. And so I just want to throw that out there really as this kind of pervasive argument. He wrote this article like in '92, right? And it still pervades the thinking and many of the political arguments and many of the messaging that occurs around. And I bring it up only because we think that it only applies to Republican conservative folk, but it really does apply largely to middle class people also who retain certain level of resources. And so those are the folks with which work has to be done additionally as well. So I throw that out there. That's one thing. And so I want to just throw that out to you all about this whole notion of fair share, fair play, without examining all the things that we know really do create people's lives in the context. But I want to throw that out there as an initial response to that comment.
So I think, as I was saying earlier, I think my response is that I agree. We were at the Puerto Rican Day Parade. Was that, is there such a thing?
Yeah.
Lots of parades. And so the good thing is, we do live in an age where a moment where organizing around some of these issues is very accessible, right? So when we do polls, we know that even if it's not a sweeping majority, right, the majority of people in Illinois, certainly on minimum wage, think the wage is too low and we should raise the wage, right? So I want to say that and not do a sort of sweeping indictment of folks who live in the state. And I also want to acknowledge that in these public settings, there are these folks who engage as like, you know, I work really hard, and, you know, if you're making minimum wage, that is entirely your fault. So I want to agree that, yes.
And do more.
Yeah, there are people and people who are in decision-making positions who hold that idea that things are available and accessible, and if you are not accessing those things, then it is your fault. And to DeAngelo's point, just this week, he and I were working on something together because there were people who had gotten jobs, right? Well-meaning folks who then lost jobs because of records. And you're like, yeah, but these are folks who want to work. And there are these barriers that prevent them from working, right? So, yes, are there people who say things are available? Yes, and it is problematic and they are wrong, right? In a lot of ways, there are these barriers, institutional, that prevent people. And I also want to lift up that I think there are, even in this state, the work is not so much to change the minds of people who don't agree with us. It is to get people who agree with us to take action.
Yeah.
Because when we, everyone in this room is going to say yes on minimum wage. The data tells us that 1 out of every 4 of us will vote. That is the problem. At least where we're sitting, right? It's not so much that let's go out, and as organizers, that's how we think, right? Let's move our pluses, right? So we know 60% is with us. I don't have time to engage the 40 because we have the majority. What I have to do is say, you are part of the 60, and your ass cannot stay home on November 4th, right?
What happens if we just make it a lot easier for people to vote? And I'm curious what you think, Illinois, where, if this is possible in Illinois, I mean, if you could vote with your cell phone or online or at a computer, that would totally change
It's coming.
voting.
It's coming, eventually.
But where is that at right now?
So Illinois just expanded a lot of opportunities to vote, including same-day registration and voting. Early voting goes almost all the way to the day before Election Day now. There is a ton. You can register to vote online. All of these things just happened this past year. I think we are a very long way from being able to sit home and vote.
It's a prototype though out there for that, and it's a people pusher because they talked about it right before President Obama's second term. That there is technology out there that will allow people to register to vote online, and what will happen is as the millenniums come through, they will change how we vote. So right now we got the old system, right? We have to deal with it, but this is the beauty of evolution to me. Is that it's going to evolve into a place where we think would be easy for all of us. But the problem in that is we have to find that common ground before we evolve to that era.
I agree.
I just wanted to, before we dip in, because I know we're ready to roll. They're ready. Was there any other responses around the fair share, fair play comments before we go? Because I know loads of questions about some of your respective kind of opening remarks too. That we want to
I
get
think at. the problem with fair play and fair share, I think the whole problem with fair being used around the amount for wages. I think that it is we just have, as a country and as a society, we have a problem with facts and figures, and we're addicted to facts and figures in a way that, for me now, a lot of valuation of services, of items, of people have become really irrelevant because of how much it changes or whatnot. I think as a society, we're off in value. What's happening when you talk about let's give them $8 an hour for this job or $10 an hour for a job, what really is happening is that we're looking at a population, we're looking at people we don't value.
Right.
We're looking at communities that we don't value.
Right.
And what happens is that because it's systematic, systems create then an internalized devaluation.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't see, and it takes a lot of programming to change that valuation, especially when you walk out the door and the price tags, and there are different kinds of price tags. But the price tags that are up or everywhere around, Chicago are telling you that you're not worth anything.
Come on.
When you have mental health issues, a lot of people are written off that they can only do certain types of things. When we're not being innovative enough to take advantage of the brilliance of certain people who have mental health issues, who just see things differently, who process things differently. So what we have is we have a system of things that have worked for a certain amount of people for the longer amount of time that they're using that to gauge other things. We're not creating situations that incentivize innovation around putting people back to work, giving people, and again, me coming from trans tech, I feel like, our vision and our sort of lens to see things is seeing technology as this just tool that a lot of people are using to wreak havoc on the world, and a lot of people are using just to waste time. But like you say, when you can get people who are interested in doing something different and making a movement and improving things, you can use technology to find somebody who is really good with just giving their perspective, being able to have access to the internet. You have, and I speak from the trans community, you have the trans community where it's like, we're trying to service the population, but we can't get to them, or we don't have this, but they're sitting right there on the internet. And you have a lot of organizations who are still filing papers and still using certain things. They're so way behind this problem. Our value, for me, when we talk about wages, money, specific numbers, it doesn't mean anything to me, because I feel like at my wage or whatever it is that I make or was making, some people do the argument, well, if they're making 12, then what should I be making at this point? And it's like, the valuation is off. My value is not tied to this other person's value. It's different and should be seen as such, and should be like, we need to be able to come from places in the entrepreneurial sectors, in the nonprofit sectors, and a lot of these sectors, to be able to take a population that's not being utilized and to find and create value in those spaces.
Thank you. Thank you very much. John, I don't think I've got any, the numbers that I laid out, it's about, I also think that it's about access to opportunity. You have to have, in order to have a successful democracy, you have to have equal opportunity, equal access to the same opportunities. If you don't have the equal access, you don't have a democracy where everybody's on the same place. And since we are a society, as a capitalistic society, as a democracy, as we are a country and a state and a city where the middle class is falling further and further into the working class, the middle class which stabilizes us, in working class communities we have less access. So we have less ability to move back into the middle class and to stabilize society. That's what this argument about income inequality is about. Really, at the base of it is, do we have a stable democracy where people have equal access to opportunity? Yeah.
I was just to the issue of voting. I agree, voting needs to be made easier for folks, but I guess I don't want to. I think I'm trying to find that fine line in between making it so easy where people just be lazy, like put their fingerprint on the screen and kind of sit on the couch and vote from home, and like having to get up and wait in line for 6 or 7 hours to vote. Because I do think voting is too important for people to just kind of sit back. I think people need to get up and take some type of action. Again, people have fought and died for the right to vote, especially folks like me, and so I want to make sure that I think our work needs to begin to educate folks about the importance of voting and why do we need to do it. Again, the biggest mobilizations in this country weren't during the civil rights movement, weren't around immigration reform. They actually happen every 2 and 4 years on the first Tuesday of the month, and that's through our elections. So they're very important, and I think we need to figure out ways to make it easier, but I guess not so easy for folks. So in terms of that, I mean, you know, aside from like sitting at home, I think having elections on a Tuesday in the middle of the week is ridiculous. The reason why it is that day is so folks can go to church on Sunday and then get the family together in the horse and buggy and ride into the cities where the polling places were for folks who live way out in the sticks when, you know, this is when our country was first established. I think changing the day when we have elections to a weekend when folks aren't working, having election, if you're having it one day, having it be 24 hours for people who work different shifts. I think there's a lot of things we can do to make voting a lot easier for folks, but not necessarily take it to the point where, again, we're just sitting on the couch and pressing a button.
Do you think that the voting, that the people, you say that you want to get out the importance, that it is this importance to vote, but I feel like there's this loss of trust in our government and in the system for populations that don't see enough change. And I mean, I am one that always says vote, 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 you know, you need to vote. But I can't say that I don't understand the, you know, the coming from a place where you're not seeing a lot of change and you vote year after year, or you see in the media and you see the way the Congress, or, you know, acts like a circus, or you see that certain things that the way politics work and you're just not trusting in it anymore. I'm just bringing to light. I hear what you're saying there, but I'm like,
But civic engagement doesn't end on election day. So that with Obama, and as bad as he's been, in my opinion and other folks' opinion, you know, the problem with Obama was he couldn't get a lot done because what Obama did was build an army. He didn't build a constituency. And so an army, you know, they fought the battle. They got him elected in 2008, 2012. But then they were done because the battle was over with. The constituency will help him get elected, but will continue to push him and also push other politicians so he could have gotten some other things done. I think that's we tend to think that just voting on election day and getting our people in office is enough when it's not. We have to continue to be engaged, and that's why our organizing is like set up like that. We, you know, elections are part of what we do, but we try to engage folks in the political process throughout the entire year.
And so one final question around just how you are currently engaging your respective constituencies. So just some, you know, examples and some practical, some applied approaches that you're currently making use of between this world of, you know, ready access to technology and wanting to do it on an app, right? And getting out and actually going to the voting place, one place, but also marches, you know, other convenings, other kinds of strategies that you might actually be engaging around messaging and also pushing your legislative work. So how are you engaging community? How are you defining your community, your constituencies, and how are you engaging them?
I think I can answer this in two ways. The first is that I'm from the Green Machine at AFSCME. Nobody turns out like we turn out. When we show up and when we have fought every single one of the fights that I just talked about in cuts of services, there are thousands of our members that show up. Like, we don't show up with a small group. When we did the march on Springfield, what was that, 2011, when we passed the income tax, us and the other labor organizations and some of our community partners who work through our models, we put 15,000 people on the streets of Springfield. Like, it was the second largest group that had ever been in Springfield. The only larger group that had ever been there was when organized labor went down to get Jim Thompson to sign the bill to make public employees union members. We turn out, right? It's not about us. It's about us working with the general community.
And I would also add there's also some agreed understanding around what the power of the presence means for the union also. And so it's clear what the stakes are to the union members as well, right?
Oh, yes.
And so that's, I guess, feels like a clearer and easier way in some ways to organize, right? Because you've got a machine in some ways that works and that is able to be kind of, not polarized, but moved and activated at the point that it's needed. How do you do that, and how are they engaging beyond the ranks?
So I can get to, by the way, the reason that the organization is, and we can contact all of our members and do all of those things. That's why the Koch brothers and others want to kill us. They want to kill us to watch us die, so that our folks will not get that contact. That our folks who vote at outrageously high rates compared to the regular population, like, don't show up because they're not educated in the same way that our members are educated.
And it is that I'm really trying to get at also. So what other tools do you use around education?
So we have emails that go out, but it's like the number of tools that we use
Are
and
varied, of course.
it's we have 1/3 of our entire organization works to educate our members. And so they deal with workplace issues at all times. We have 250 local presidents who are consistently engaged by that 1/3. We have 250 political folks in each one of those places, and they are consistently engaged. The email chains that go out go to those folks, and then like the workplace flyering, and all of the other pieces, like we have a newspaper and all of these other things, the message is constantly reinforced. And as we're reaching out to others, I have just been assigned to the Illinois Freedom Independent Expenditure, and it is for the election, this election cycle. And I'm not going to talk about it much because this is not a political place. But I will say that it is an effort to have union members talk to non-union members about the importance of the election.